So we left off with yesterday. We just put up, placed, put up, whichever, um, three concepts with that of the cephalopods. Okay, because does anyone want to take a guess why we would spend the most time on the cephalopods?
Because they're the most complex.
Yeah, because they're the most complex. There's four types of animals, but we're only going to look at three because we could say that the cuttlefish are very closely related to that of its cousins, the squids and the octopods. So why would that be? How is it that they're more closely related to those two and not the nautiloids?
Because their shell is on the inside.
Yeah, and their shells on both answers you're talking about are correct. Okay, so we could look at it in this fashion. See, I got a new blue marker. We'll see how that shows up. Something along the lines of maybe while discussing the cephalopods. Now, this is going to be on Thursday, what we're going over now, okay? So while discussing the cephalopods, describe how there are similarities not callus, class. And then, and and their differences. See if anybody catches that. There's a reason we said ha ha. Yeah. Does anyone want to make a comment on my goodly grammar? Yeah, it's the wrong there. Yeah. So I just got to the E and I thought, well, I'm gonna put that up there, see if anyone thinks that's funny. Probably not. And their differences. Okay? So when we say their differences, we're talking about the cephalopods themselves. Okay. So that must mean you have to list a cephalopod to begin with. So who would you like to start with? Okay. So in this case, we could say, now remember, this has to be in sentence form tomorrow. We just connect the dots on what we're outlining here. So we could say the squids, okay? Who do they have something in common with? So, okay, the squids have, so how is it that you can correlate them with the octopods? Now, think about three things, three main concepts within this class. We wrote them, I think, on the board. Yes, no, that was the essays. Okay, so we want to talk about this. Nope, because gastropods and bivalves have that too. So something about the shell. Okay, so appendages. Okay.
What if we write arms on this? Lungs?
I want to talk about this as well.
What if we write arms instead of appendages, or arms or like
Technically, it's not wrong, but I would say why. So what this means then, so the squids have this an internal shell. Okay, now its movement is going to be indirectly correlated to the shell, and will make and the octopod. The squids have an internal shell along with the octopods. Okay, now the reason that that's important, okay, when we're talking about this shell, we said that would be here, is because we want to discuss movement now. Now, that internal shell has nothing to do with the movement of the squid and octopods, so that must mean it has something to do with their other cousins, which are who? Don't say, yes, your nautiloids. Nautilus, I just like to say nautiloids because then you're not saying, maybe it's easier to spell, and you're not saying nautiluses, but I think you would just say nautilus, okay? Along with the octopods, okay? The reason that's important is because nautiloids have an internal or external shell? It's an external shell. That's why we wanted to make reference to this. So we said the octopods and the squid, the shell has nothing to do with movement, but it does with that of the nautiloids. Why might that be? Is that shell heavy?
No.
Well, you could say yes and no, probably because it's got a lot of keratin or chitin or proteins like that that are in its shell, but it still would be heavier than water probably. But the reason for that is, how do these animals actually move? It has something to do with their shell, where this, it doesn't.
They're buoyant because they have
Their buoyancy. Their buoyancy is tied, or I wouldn't say tied to, but has something to do with their shell. So the nautiloids have an external shell which allows them to be more or less, oh boy, I think that's right, less or more buoyant in water. So what that means is they just kind of bob along in the water, and that's how their movement is formed, with gas, mainly oxygen, that is inside of their shell. So if these animals are moving because of buoyancy in their shells, how are these two animals moving then?
They're appendages.
No. Yeah, they got jet propulsion, because what happens is water goes inside their mantle. They'll squeeze that out of there, and that will push them in the opposite direction. Okay? So probably similar to that of the jellyfish. I would say that's probably correct. So then we could actually attach that onto here, okay, because these have that in common. But it's not with their shell. Their shell is interior. We could say interior shell along with the octopods, and move from or for, oh, well, you can't. Yeah, we can say from jet propulsion. Okay, so that takes care of the shell. All right, because their shell is tied to the movement, and that's why we wanted to spend time with that. So in your estimation, what's next? Appendages or respiration? Okay, so we're moving on to the appendages. So in this case, okay, you need to pick an animal of these three. Okay, so for appendages, the squid, we're actually going to make that plural, the squids then. You could probably just say squid, but I'm going to say squids. So what's significant about their appendages then? Is there 8, 10, 12, 14, 6? Okay, for appendages, the squids have, it's 10 appendages, but we want to be specific by saying 8 legs, and where does the other 2 come from when we say 10? Okay. I suppose because the similarity between arms and legs is for grasping onto things. So if you put arms here, I suppose technically it's not wrong, but I just use legs. And then 2, as you correctly said, tentacles. Okay. So then that takes care of the squids. That's actually going to be different than both of them, because notice these have a similarity in their movement, the squid and the octopods. That sets them apart. But when it comes to appendages, do the squid have a similarity with the octopods and nautiloids? Are they altogether different? They are different, but why is that? And it's in the numbers.
Because the not always have 60 to 90.
And it's just hard to fathom that, the idea that they would have that many, but they actually do. Nautiloids have, so 60 is the low end, 90 is the high end. Let's see, that's a difference of 30. We'll split the difference, just say, what, 75, take the average. Makes sense to me. Rather than writing 60 to 90, the nautiloids have, we'll just say 75. So arms, legs, appendages, what? Okay, appendages. Which must mean, if we're talking about 2 of these, the squids, then the nautiloids, it must be different than that of the octopods, which it is. And that would be how many then? It would just be 8, okay? And then you could just say, finally, the octopods have 8 arms, 8 legs, 8 appendages, whichever way you want to describe it. No, because how do we associate tentacles? Having what? Not only being retractable, but also envenomation. And when we say octopods, they can poison their prey, but it's not how you think. It's not because of envenomation like that of the cnidarians, okay? Or like jellyfish, which are cnidarians. So therefore, we want to say they have 8 arms, 8 legs, 8 appendages. Which is it?
8 arms.
Okay? If you want to put appendages, that's fine too. Okay, so we've discussed the similarities of the shell and how that's tied to movement. We've talked about the differences in their appendages between those 3 animals. Now we want to talk about, finally, respiration. And of course, it's not because of lungs, but rather what instead? Because of the gills. Okay? So for respiration, okay, 2 of them have something in common, but which 2? Is it the nautiloids and the squid? Is it the nautiloids and the octopods? Or is it the squid and the octopods? Okay, so you're right, but what is it?
They only have one set of gills.
One pair of gills. For respiration, the squid and octopods have one pair of gills. Okay, so that must be significant, that the number 1. Why might that be as opposed to their nautiloid cousins?
Say like 4 or something.
Well, 4 total.
2 pairs.
Yeah, 2 pairs. 2 pairs of gills. Okay? While the nautiloids have 2 pair. And not that students would ask this, but what would make sense to me, you might say, well, why do they have 4 gills or 2 pairs in the nautiloids for respiration? Yes, they're taking in more oxygen, but why might this have something to do with that? Yeah, is there buoyancy? Yes. So if you have more gills, okay, to me, it might make sense that that's how nature selected them to deal with this. Taking in more oxygen, taking less oxygen, okay? Because the more oxygen that you have inside that shell makes it more lighter. The less oxygen you have makes it heavier. And you might think, oh, I don't know if that really makes any sense, but we've seen that with it was the evolution of size when it came to whales. When they want to dive to really deep depths, what do they do with their oxygen inside their I almost said gills, inside their lungs? They get rid of all of that, and then they really drop. So that's how we make that correlation. The less oxygen, down you go. The more oxygen, up you go. All right. So that's what we want to discuss with that of the cephalopods.
How many appendages do cuttlefish have?
8. Okay, so I'm just going to hit pause for just a moment. Okay, so when it comes to that of the bivalves, how does their process of food gathering take place? And, excuse me, if you need to, maybe it's a handy time to get out those diagrams that you have drawn and labeled so that you can actually use this to maybe describe how food gathering takes place. So, to make sense of this, what type of feeders are they? They're filter feeders. So that must mean something is doing filtering inside, which it does. So, starting with, you could say algae or debris. What makes more sense to you? I think the author says debris. Is that what you want to stick with?
Yes.
Okay, so debris along with water. It has to get inside that clam somehow. What is it that's on the posterior side? There's 2 of these. Okay?
Exterior, interior.
Debris along with water enters the incurrent opening. So, which one's on top in the back? Is the excurrent or incurrent on top?
Incurrent.
Are you sure? I think it's actually the excurrent because I think we had looked at that. And maybe that's how you have it drawn in there. Page 193. We'll just really take a quick look at it because I want to make sure we're giving you accurate information. Okay? So then what we see happening here is it just, like even the author says, it's debris. It just says sand and debris, but that's coming into that in-current opening that, as we had established, is on the bottom. Okay? So as it enters, where is that water going? Over something. Okay? So then we could say, when we say materials, that means all of this. So then materials, the water and the debris. We could say flows over the gills, you said, which is correct. Now, why is that important in the sense of this filter feeding for these animals?
Because it gets caught,
It does, but how does it get caught?
gets caught,
Cilia?
It does, but in order to get trapped in that cilia, something else has to take place. Yes, the gills will secrete mucus, okay, which secrete mucus. So then, once that mucus is secreted, what happens to their food source? It gets what? Caught, trapped, whichever way you want to look at it, okay? Okay, so once this is caught in the mucus, this is where the filtering comes from. Because how is it getting on top of these gills to the mouth?
cilia.
Yeah, the cilia, that's right. Okay, so then cilia will sweep. Okay, just you could say like bristles on a broom, because that's what those cilia would look like. Sweep materials to the mouth. So then now it can enter the mouth, so it can be digested. Then what's going through the top portion or the excurrent opening? Just plain water. So then we could say water exits, and that's all that's in there is just water. Now there might be some of their food source that just doesn't get filtered out of there. So water exits, excurrent opening. Okay. And I think that would do it. You're describing the process of food gathering with clams. Uh-huh. So, anything about this? Again, this is not tomorrow. This is on Thursday. So tomorrow is your vocabulary and general questions. Just know what animals belong in what class. There's a lot of vocabulary on there. Those were handed back to you. Okay. Maybe some of the identifications on what it means, something like the umbo. We talked about that in class. That's actually in the front on the anterior side. It's just a bump on there that would house the or protect the hinge ligaments, which means the adductor muscles. So adduction is that this or that. There's actually probably things you can do in, I almost said the gym, but in the weight room that works on adduction, a machine that does that. Does that mean you push it away or do you pull it towards you? Yeah, adduction means you're pulling it towards yourself, okay? And that's another way that clams can get away. They can just creep along because of their foot, but they can also open their shell and then slam shut. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit. By clamping that shut, that would just propel them away in a more quickly / efficient motion. Okay. So we can get rid of this, we can just leave that up too. But then your identifications, that's also on Thursday. So when you think, is there a word bank? Well, yes and no, okay? So you need to get started on that right away, whether you're doing these or whether you're doing your identifications. We will not give you a word bank until about this time, okay? Because otherwise, if we just give it to you right away, the word bank, well then I'm just going to rely on that word bank, okay? So this isn't a college class yet, but it is an upper level class to have here. So yes, you do get one, but you need to get started on it right away or first before we give you that information. Anything else? Why? Okay, so just hang on just a moment. Okay, so these have to be written out and they have on your paper like a lot of you are doing. It doesn't have to have this, okay? But it also has to be turned in tomorrow. So then as far as truck driving is concerned, what is OTR? So you sometimes see this. What is an OTR truck driver? It is blank. And then when we're talking about the Electoral College, which is how we elect our president, it's a race to this number. What is the number of electoral votes? What is that race to? What do we have? What is either candidate Harris or candidate Trump? It's a race to this number. Okay, so we will catch up to you next time.